My name is Harper. I'm 30 years old. And the moment my father called me a family disgrace in front of 17 people is burned into my memory forever. His voice cut through the elegant dining room of Morton's Steakhouse like a knife through butter, silencing every conversation at our massive table. The crystal chandeliers overhead seemed to dim as he slid the leather bill holder across the white tablecloth toward me. His eyes cold and calculating. $1,247.83. That's what my humiliation cost, apparently. My hands trembled as I stared at the total, feeling the weight of 17 pairs of eyes boring into me. But what he didn't know was, I had been planning my own surprise for months. Before we dive into how I got here and what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with a toxic family member who tried to publicly shame you, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story takes some wild turns you won't want to miss. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. Growing up in the Sullivan household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy, and mine was always at the bottom. My older brother Wesley had been Dad's pride and joy since the moment he scored the winning touchdown in his high school homecoming game. Wesley became a successful corporate lawyer, married his college sweetheart Bethany, bought a house 3 blocks from our childhood home, and gave Dad 2 picture-perfect grandchildren. Every Sunday dinner was a celebration of Wesley's latest promotion, his newest luxury car, or his kids' achievements in school. I, on the other hand, became the family's cautionary tale. When I graduated with a degree in graphic design, Dad actually laughed and asked when I was going to get a real education. When I announced I was moving to Portland to pursue freelance work, he told everyone at my going-away dinner that I was running away from responsibility. The comparisons never stopped. Wesley got his entire college tuition paid in full while I took out $70,000 in student loans that Dad co-signed but never contributed a penny toward. When Wesley married Bethany in an extravagant ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, Dad footed the $40,000 bill without blinking. 3 years ago, when I married my ex-husband Julian in a small ceremony at a local vineyard, Dad handed me a check for $500 and told me it was all my unconventional lifestyle deserved. The pattern of favoritism wove itself into every aspect of our lives like poison ivy strangling a garden. At family gatherings, Dad would spend hours discussing Wesley's cases, his legal strategies, his partnership track. When anyone asked about my work, Dad would wave his hand dismissively and change the subject before I could answer. His favorite phrase became a soundtrack to my existence, playing on repeat every time I saw him. When are you going to get a real job? It didn't matter that I was paying my bills, building a client base, or even enjoying my work. In Dad's eyes, if it wasn't a corner office with a nameplate and a secretary, it wasn't legitimate. Mom would offer me apologetic looks across the dinner table but never said a word in my defense. She had perfected the art of peacekeeping through silence, sacrificing me on the altar of Dad's ego to keep the household calm. I watched her shrink herself smaller and smaller over the years, and I promised myself I would never become that. But promises are easier to make than keep when you're desperate for a parent's approval. Everything shifted into an even darker territory 8 months ago when my marriage to Julian ended. We had grown apart, simple as that. He wanted to travel the world and I wanted to build my business. We loved each other but weren't in love anymore. The divorce was amicable, respectful, even. We split our assets fairly, wished each other well, and went our separate ways. But Dad saw it as the ultimate failure, the final proof that I was incapable of doing anything right. He called me the day the divorce was finalized and said, "You couldn't even keep a husband. What's wrong with you?" He conveniently ignored that Wesley's marriage was hanging by a thread, that Bethany had confided in Mom about Wesley's long work hours and emotional distance, that their kids barely saw their father. None of that mattered because Wesley still wore his wedding ring and showed up to family photos with his wife. I was the divorced one, the broken one, the disappointment. Dad told his golf buddies that I had driven Julian away with my selfish career ambitions. He told our extended family that I had never understood the meaning of commitment. He rewrote the entire narrative to make me the villain in a story that had no villains, only two people who chose honesty over misery. When Dad called 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, his tone was clipped and commanding. Family dinner. Thanksgiving night. Morton's Steakhouse at 6. Be there. No excuses. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the end call button. I had spent the last 8 months building boundaries, working with my therapist on detaching from his approval, finding peace in my own company. But then Mom called an hour later, her voice small and pleading. Please come. Harper. It's been so long since we've all been together. Your father misses you even if he doesn't know how to say it. I knew that was a lie. Knew that Dad didn't miss me so much as miss having a target for his criticism. But I heard the exhaustion in Mom's voice, and I caved. I told myself it was just one dinner, just a few hours, that I could handle it for Mom's sake. I should have known better. I should have recognized the setup. Dad had chosen the most expensive steakhouse in the city, the kind of place where appetizers cost $30 and a decent bottle of wine ran into the triple digits. The guest list had grown from immediate family to 17 people, including Dad's 2 siblings, their spouses and kids, plus 3 of Dad's college friends who I barely knew. When I asked Mom why the dinner had expanded so much, she said Dad wanted to celebrate Wesley's recent promotion to senior partner. Of course. Another celebration of the golden child while I showed up alone, divorced, with no +1 allowed because Dad said the reservation was tight enough as it was. Morton's Steakhouse radiated old money and exclusivity from every polished surface. The valet took my modest SUV with barely concealed disdain, probably more accustomed to the luxury sedans and sports cars that typically pulled up to the entrance. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in pristine white linens, each setting arranged with precision that spoke of price tags I didn't want to think about. I had worn my best dress, a navy blue sheath that I'd bought for a client presentation, paired with the pearl earrings Julian had given me for our first anniversary. I wanted to look successful, put together, worthy of a place at the table, even if Dad would never see me that way. The hostess led me through the main dining room to a private section in the back where I could already hear Dad's booming laugh echoing off the walls. Wesley's kids, Camden and Sloane, were racing around the table despite Bethany's half-hearted attempts to corral them. Dad sat at the head of the massive table like a king holding court, his face flushed with bourbon and self-satisfaction, surrounded by his siblings and friends who laughed at his jokes with the practiced enthusiasm of people who knew which side their bread was buttered on. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know about my place in this family tableau. Dad occupied the throne at the head of the table with Wesley positioned at his right hand like a crown prince, the place of honor. Mom sat on Dad's left, playing her role as the silent queen consort. Dad's brother Marcus and sister Lorraine claimed the seats nearest to Dad, their families flanking them in descending order of importance. I found my name card at the far end of the table, squeezed between the wall and the swinging kitchen door, so far from Dad I'd need binoculars to make eye contact. The symbolic placement wasn't lost on me. I was literally at the kids' table end despite being 30 years old, positioned where the servers would bump my chair every time they rushed through with trays of food. My Aunt Lorraine caught my eye as I sat down and leaned over to whisper, "Your father's in one of his moods tonight. Tread carefully, honey." Her warning sent ice through my veins, but I forced a smile and thanked her, wondering what fresh hell awaited me. Dinner began with Dad in full performance mode, ordering the most expensive items on the menu with theatrical flair. Bone-in ribeyes, twin lobster tails, truffle mashed potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta, bottles of Caymus Cabernet that cost more per glass than some people's hourly wage. He encouraged everyone to indulge, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of magnanimous generosity. Order whatever you want. Tonight we're celebrating. His voice carried that edge of aggressive cheerfulness that I recognized from childhood. The tone that meant someone was going to pay for this largesse, in ways that had nothing to do with money. Celebrating what, exactly? Wesley's promotion, of course. Dad raised his glass in a toast that went on for 5 minutes, recounting every achievement Wesley had accumulated since law school, praising his work ethic and dedication, his commitment to family and tradition. My son, Dad proclaimed, his chest puffed with pride, represents everything this family stands for. Excellence, integrity, success. Then his eyes slid down the length of the table to where I sat, partially hidden behind Uncle Marcus. Some people contribute to the family legacy. Others, well, not so much. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even Camden and Sloane stopped fidgeting, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The interrogation began during the appetizer course. After everyone had loosened up with drinks, and the initial awkwardness of gathering had faded, Dad's voice cut across the multiple conversations happening at once. So, Harper, how's the divorce treating you? Found another man to disappoint yet? The table went silent. Completely, utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. I felt my face flush hot, my hands clenching around my water glass hard enough that I worried it might shatter. I forced my voice to stay level, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. I'm focusing on my career right now, Dad. Taking time to invest in myself. Dad scoffed. Actually scoffed like ID. Told a bad joke. Career? Is that what we're calling it now? You color pictures on a computer. Harper. My grandson does that with crayons. His friends chuckled, exchanging knowing looks. Wesley stared intensely at his plate, his jaw tight but his mouth firmly closed. Bethany shifted uncomfortably, reaching for her wine glass like it was a life preserver. Uncle Marcus, bless him, tried to redirect the conversation to safer waters. Actually, Dale, I was curious about Harper's work. Didn't you land some big client recently? Tech company or something? I seized the lifeline gratefully, sitting up straighter. Yes, actually. A startup based in Seattle. They hired me to redesign their entire brand identity, website, marketing materials. It's a $50,000 contract. I said it with pride because I was proud. It was the biggest contract it ever landed, the culmination of years of building my reputation and portfolio. But Dad's face darkened, his lips twisting into something between a sneer and a smile. Startups fail, Harper. That's what they do. 90% of them go belly up within the first year. You'll be broke and begging for money in 6 months, mark my words. His friend Gerald nodded sagely, as if Dad had just dispensed profound wisdom. Kids these days chase these pipe dreams instead of getting stable jobs with benefits and pensions. I felt something crack inside my chest. A fissure that had been forming for years suddenly splitting wide open. Dessert arrived on a parade of white plates, each slice of chocolate torte and crème brûlée arranged like edible art. Champagne appeared for another round of toasts to Wesley, because apparently one wasn't enough. Dad stood again, glass raised, his face glowing with paternal pride and expensive liquor. He launched into another speech about Wesley's accomplishments, his trajectory, his bright future. Then, right in the middle of praising Wesley's recent victory in a high-profile case, Dad's attention swiveled to me like a spotlight looking for its next victim. You know what? I'm tired of funding your failures, Harper. I blinked, confused. What? Dad, I didn't ask you for anything. I haven't asked you for money since I paid off my student loans 2 years ago. But he wasn't listening, had never been listening. He was building towards something. I could see it in the way he positioned himself, in the theatrical pause he took before dropping whatever bomb he'd been planning all night. Dad's speech shifted gears from celebration to execution with the smooth practice of someone who had been rehearsing this moment in his head. Everyone here has contributed something to this family. His voice carried across the private dining room, silencing the soft jazz playing in the background, commanding attention from every person at the table. and several nearby tables in the main dining room, who had turned to watch the drama unfold. He pointed at Wesley with his champagne glass, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Success. Drive. Ambition. Grandchildren who will carry on the Sullivan name. Then his finger swung toward me like a weapon. And then there's you. Disappointment, failure, embarrassment. He began ticking off my supposed sins on his fingers like he was presenting evidence in a trial. Divorced before 35. No stable income. No house, just some tiny apartment you rent. No children. No husband. No prospects. You've given this family nothing but headaches and excuses. He looked around the table, making sure he had everyone's attention, playing to his audience. My friends ask me about my kids. I tell them about Wesley's partnerships, his beautiful family, his accomplishments. You know what I say about you? I change the subject. Because there's nothing to say. You're a disgrace to the Sullivan name. The word disgrace hung in the air like smoke from a gun. I heard Aunt Lorraine gasp softly. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak, didn't defend me, didn't do anything except sit there looking miserable and helpless. Dad wasn't finished. He signaled to the waiter, who appeared almost immediately as if this had been choreographed. The waiter, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable with whatever was happening, handed Dad the leather bill holder. Dad opened it, glanced at the total with theatrical surprise even though he'd been the one ordering the most expensive items all night, then slid it down the long table toward me. It took several people passing it along before it reached my end, each person handling it like a hot potato they couldn't wait to get rid of. When it finally landed in front of me, I stared at the numbers. $1,247.83. You're covering this, Dad announced, his tone brooking no argument. Consider it your contribution to this family for once. Your way of showing you appreciate everything we've done for you. I looked up from the bill, my brain struggling to process what was happening. What? Dad, I didn't even know I was expected to pay. You invited everyone. You chose this restaurant. You ordered bottles of wine that cost hundreds of dollars. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, tight and strained. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, the picture of patriarchal authority. You have a credit card, don't you? Or did your ex-husband take that too when he left you? Laughter erupted from his friends, loud and cruel. Even Uncle Marcus couldn't suppress a slight smile, though he had the decency to look ashamed of it immediately after. Bethany covered her face with her napkin. Camden asked his mother what was happening, his voice high and confused. Wesley finally spoke, his words barely above a whisper. Dad, that's not fair. She didn't know. But Dad silenced him with a single look, the same look that had kept Wesley in line his entire life. Stay out of this. You've earned your place at this table through hard work and dedication. She needs to do the same. The witnesses to my humiliation sat frozen in their seats, like an audience at a play they hadn't paid to see but couldn't look away from. Mom looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Her hands twisted in her lap, her eyes darting between Dad and me with the desperation of someone caught between two impossible choices. Aunt Lorraine leaned toward me, her voice gentle but firm. Just pay it, honey. Don't make a scene. It's not worth the fight. But her sympathy felt hollow because she wasn't willing to actually stand up to Dad either. Dad's college friends nodded their approval of his tough love approach, probably imagining themselves as equally stern fathers who knew how to keep their children in line. Gerald actually said out loud, "Kids these days don't understand the value of money or respect. Sometimes you have to teach them the hard way." The younger kids at the table, Wesley's children and Uncle Marcus' teenage daughter Felicity, watched with wide eyes, learning in real time that this was how family worked, that humiliation and control were acceptable tools in the hands of patriarchs. My internal battle raged louder than any conversation at the table. I could pay the bill. That was the thing Dad didn't know. The secret I'd been holding close to my chest. I actually had the money. The $50,000 contract ID mentioned wasn't the only success ID had this year. I'd been quietly building my business, taking on more clients, raising my rates, investing wisely. I had $47,000 in my savings account, my student loans were paid off, and I owned my small condo outright. I could pull out my credit card right now, pay this ridiculous bill without even putting a dent in my finances, and walk away. But something in me rebelled against the principle of it. This wasn't about money. This was about control, about Dad's need to punish me for not fitting into the box he'd built for me, about his compulsion to prove that he still had power over my life. I remembered what my therapist Fiona had said during our last session, her words echoing in my head. Boundaries aren't walls you build to keep people out. They're gates you control to determine who gets access to you, and on what terms. Your father has spent your whole life teaching you that his access to you is unlimited and unconditional. It's time to teach him differently. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, loud enough that every head turned toward me. My hands were shaking, but I clasped them together to steady them, drawing in a deep breath that felt like it filled my lungs for the first time in years. When I spoke, my voice was quieter than I expected, but it carried clearly in the thick silence. No. Just that one word, but it felt like dropping a bomb. Dad's eyebrows shot up, his face transitioning from smug satisfaction to disbelief. What did you say? I forced myself to look directly at him, to hold eye contact even though every childhood instinct screamed at me to back down, apologize, make myself small. I said no. I'm not paying for this dinner. His face flushed deep red, the color creeping up from his collar like a tide. What did you just say to me? I repeated myself, louder this time, my voice finding strength I didn't know I had. No. I'm not paying for this. Dad exploded out of his chair like he'd been ejected from it, his hand slamming down on the table so hard that glasses rattled and silverware jumped. You ungrateful brat! After everything I've done for you. His voice had reached that dangerous volume that I remembered from childhood, the one that used to send me running to my room to hide. But I was 30 years old now, standing in a public restaurant, and I refused to run anymore. I kept my voice steady, almost conversational in its calmness, which seemed to infuriate him even more. What have you done for me, Dad? Specifically, I'd really like to know. He sputtered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish yanked from water, struggling to come up with examples that didn't sound petty or ancient. Finally he landed on, I raised you. I put a roof over your head. I fed you and clothed you. I nodded slowly. Yes, you did. Those are the basic requirements of being a parent. That's not something I owe you eternal gratitude for. That's just what parents are supposed to do. The guilt trip tactics came fast and furious after that, Dad cycling through his greatest hits of manipulation with the speed of someone who had these arguments loaded and ready. I paid for your braces, your orthodontist bills were thousands of dollars. And that car, your first car. I bought you that car. I felt my jaw tighten, but I maintained my composure. The braces were when I was 14, Dad. That was 16 years ago. And you've brought them up at least once a month for the last decade. At this point, I've paid you back in emotional currency 10 times over. As for the car, you held that over my head for 6 years until I finally bought my own just to stop hearing about it. He grabbed onto his next lifeline desperately. College. I co-signed your student loans. You wouldn't have been able to go to college without me. The laugh that escaped my throat was bitter and sharp. Co-signing isn't the same as paying, Dad. I've been making those loan payments myself for 10 years. You never contributed a single dollar to the actual tuition. Meanwhile, Wesley got his entire education paid for in full. I'm not stupid. I know how you distributed your money. I just finally stopped pretending it was fair. Family members began taking sides, their positions revealing exactly where loyalties and fears lay. Uncle Marcus, Dad's younger brother, spoke up hesitantly. Dale, maybe this is excessive. The bill is pretty steep, and she didn't know she was expected to cover it. That's not really fair. I felt a rush of gratitude toward him even though his defense was mild at best. But Dad's friend Gerald, the one who'd been nodding along to every terrible thing Dad said all night, jumped in immediately. Children should honor their parents. The Bible says it right there, honor thy father and thy mother. This generation has forgotten respect. Aunt Lorraine looked torn, her eyes bouncing between me and Dad like she was watching a tennis match. Wesley's wife Bethany had pulled both kids close to her, her arms wrapped protectively around them as if she could shield them from witnessing their grandfather's meltdown. Uncle Marcus' wife Vivian whispered something to her daughter Felicity, probably telling her to stay out of it, to keep her head down. Dad's accusations became a litany of every perceived slight I'd ever committed against him. Years of stored resentment pouring out like poison from a lanced wound. You moved away. Abandoned this family to chase some fantasy life in Portland. You barely visit. Maybe 3 times a year, if we're lucky. You married that loser Julian who wasn't good enough for you, not that you were bright enough to see it. Then you embarrassed this entire family by getting divorced and making me explain to everyone at the club why my daughter couldn't keep a man. You haven't given me grandchildren. Wesley has 2 beautiful grandchildren I can brag about, and you've given me nothing. And this so-called career of yours, this hobby you call work, is a joke. You're 30 years old with no stability, no security, no future. You're a disgrace, Harper, an embarrassment to the Sullivan name. Each word hit like a physical blow, designed to wound, to break me down into the insecure little girl who had spent her whole childhood desperate for his approval. But something had changed in me over the past 8 months of therapy and self-reflection. I didn't crumble. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity, like I was seeing our entire relationship from a distance for the first time. I addressed each point calmly, methodically, like I was presenting a counter-argument in a debate. I moved to Portland for a job opportunity with a design firm that helped me build the foundation of my freelance career. I visit on holidays, which is exactly when you insist I come. And every single visit ends with you criticizing some aspect of my life. Julian wasn't a loser. He was kind, supportive, and we had a good relationship that simply ran its course. You calling him names says more about you than it does about him or me. The divorce wasn't an embarrassment. It was 2 adults making a mature decision. If you're embarrassed by it, that's your problem, not mine. Your desire for grandchildren doesn't obligate me to have children I'm not ready for, or don't want, and my career has supported me independently for 5 years now. I've never asked you for money, never needed you to bail me out, never come crawling back begging for help. I built something on my own, without you, and you can't stand it. The threat came like I knew it would. Dad's ultimate weapon when he felt control slipping through his fingers. His voice dropped to a dangerous quiet that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. You walk out that door without paying this bill, without apologizing for this disrespectful display, and you are no longer my daughter. Do you understand me? You'll be dead to me. No inheritance, no family events, no relationship. Gone. He snapped his fingers for emphasis. The table held its collective breath, waiting to see if I would fold, if the threat of disownment would bring me to heel like it had so many times before. But instead of fear, I felt something unexpected wash over me. Relief. Pure, crystalline relief. I realized in that moment that I had been waiting for this, hoping for it even, hoping that he would finally give me permission to leave this toxic dynamic that had poisoned my entire life. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a powerful patriarch but a sad old man terrified of losing control. Okay, I said simply. The single word seemed to stun him more than any argument could have. His eyes widened, his mouth falling open. Okay? That's all you have to say. I nodded. Yes. If that's what it takes to set me free from this, then okay. I turned toward Wesley, my brother, my blood, desperately hoping he would finally stand up and break his lifelong pattern of silence. Are you going to just sit there? My voice cracked on the words, despite my best efforts to stay composed. Wesley looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on a spot somewhere in the middle distance. Bethany nudged him hard with her elbow, whispering urgently enough that I could see her lips moving rapidly. Wesley cleared his throat, shifted in his seat, and mumbled something that might have been words if they'd had any force behind them. "Dad, maybe we should all calm down. Let's take a breath here." It was the weakest possible intervention, delivered with all the conviction of someone reading from a hostage note. Dad didn't even look at him. "This doesn't concern you, Wesley. I'm handling your sister's attitude problem." And just like that, Wesley shrank back into silence, his brief moment of courage evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. The weakness of his defense, or lack thereof, cut deeper than any of Dad's insults had. Because Dad's cruelty was expected, predictable, like gravity pulling objects downward. But Wesley's silence was a choice, an active decision to prioritize his own comfort over my dignity. I felt something fundamental shift in how I saw my brother. He muttered half-heartedly, barely loud enough for our side of the table to hear, "She doesn't have to pay for everyone. That's a lot of money." But when Dad cut him off with a sharp, "I said this doesn't concern you," Wesley immediately retreated, raising his hands in surrender, his eyes dropping back to his plate. He might as well have been invisible for all the impact his words had. The betrayal of his silence hurt in a way I hadn't anticipated, a fresh wound layered over old scars that I'd foolishly thought had healed. The pattern crystallized in my mind with sudden, painful clarity. Wesley had always been silent during Dad's attacks on me. I'd made excuses for him for years, telling myself he was just trying to keep the peace, that he cared about me even if he couldn't show it, that family dynamics were complicated. But sitting there watching him refuse to meet my eyes, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. When Dad had screamed at 10-year-old me for bringing home a report card with B's instead of straight A's, 12-year-old Wesley had watched from the doorway and said nothing. When Dad had mocked my art projects in high school, telling me they were worthless and I should focus on practical subjects, Wesley had nodded along. When Dad had told me my graphic design degree was a waste of money and I should have studied business or law, Wesley had agreed that traditional careers were more stable. At my wedding, when Dad had given that passive-aggressive toast about hoping I'd finally found stability, Wesley had laughed with everyone else. Every single time Dad had torn me down, Wesley had either participated or played the role of silent observer. I finally understood why Wesley stayed silent, and the understanding made it worse somehow. Wesley wasn't brave or principled. He was terrified. Terrified of losing Dad's favor, of becoming the target instead of the golden child, of watching his carefully constructed life crumble if he stepped out of line. His entire identity, his sense of self-worth, his position in the family hierarchy depended on maintaining Dad's approval. He had built his success on a foundation of Dad's praise and support, both emotional and financial. The down payment for his house had come from Dad. His partnership at the firm was at Dad's company, where Dad had connections that smoothed the way. His life was entangled with Dad's in ways mine had never been, and that entanglement came with strings attached. Wesley couldn't defend me without risking everything he'd built. He wasn't choosing Dad over me out of malice. He was choosing self-preservation. But that didn't make it hurt less. If anything, it made it worse, because it meant he knew what he was doing, and did it anyway. Mom's failure to speak up was its own special kind of betrayal, different from Wesley's, but equally painful. I turned to her, my eyes pleading. "Say something. Please. Anything." Mom's eyes filled with tears that spilled over and tracked through her carefully applied makeup. She twisted her napkin in her lap, her hands moving in anxious circles, her mouth opening and closing several times before any words emerged. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, defeated and small. "Just apologize to your father, Harper. Pay the bill and apologize. It's easier that way. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." The words landed like stones in my stomach. She wasn't asking me to stand up for myself. She was asking me to surrender. To sacrifice my dignity on the altar of temporary peace. Mom had been making these calculations for decades, choosing the path of least resistance, enabling Dad's behavior by never confronting it, teaching me through her example that women in the Sullivan family made themselves small to accommodate men's egos. The isolation settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating and absolute. I looked around the table at 17 faces, searching for an ally, for someone who would speak truth to the power Dad wielded so carelessly. Uncle Marcus looked sympathetic but wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly very interested in his dessert fork. Aunt Lorraine had that pity written all over her face. But pity without action is just another form of abandonment. Dad's friends were fully on his side, viewing this as a father disciplining an unruly child, rather than a grown man publicly abusing his daughter. Wesley's kids looked scared and confused, too young to understand the dynamics at play but old enough to sense something was very wrong. Bethany had physically turned her body away from the conflict, creating a barrier between her family and the drama unfolding. Vivian and Felicity were having a quiet conversation at their end of the table, deliberately excluding themselves. Even the servers had started avoiding our section, taking the long way around to reach their other tables. I was completely, utterly alone in a room full of my family. Dad sat back down, settling into his chair with the satisfied air of someone who believed victory was inevitable. A slight smirk played at the corners of his mouth, the expression of a predator who had cornered his prey and was now simply waiting for the final surrender. Last chance, Harper. Pay the bill. Apologize to everyone here for this scene you've caused. And maybe, just maybe, I'll forgive this tantrum of yours. He paused for effect, letting the silence stretch, making sure everyone was listening to what came next. Or everyone at this table, everyone in this family, will know that you abandoned us over money. That when it came down to it, you chose dollars and cents over your own blood. That's the story that will be told. That's what you'll be remembered for. The threat was clear. The narrative already written in his mind. Either I submitted, or I became the villain in the family mythology forever. But something clicked into place in my brain. A series of puzzle pieces finally forming a coherent picture that had been obscured by years of gaslighting and manipulation. I saw the whole setup with sudden, crystalline clarity. Dad had planned this. All of it. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a reaction to my behavior. This was premeditated, calculated cruelty. He had chosen Morton's Steakhouse specifically because it was expensive, because the bill would be shocking enough to use as a weapon. He had invited 17 people, expanding the guest list far beyond immediate family, to maximize both the bill total and the number of witnesses to my humiliation. He had waited until after everyone had ordered, after the most expensive wines had been poured and the premium steaks had been consumed, to spring the trap. He had arranged for the bill to arrive during dessert, at the perfect moment for maximum dramatic impact. Every detail had been orchestrated, from the seating arrangement that physically isolated me to the toast that publicly highlighted Wesley's success while implying my failure. This was psychological warfare dressed up as a family dinner. The pattern of financial abuse crystallized in my memory, incident after incident clicking together like train cars coupling on a track. 3 years ago, Dad had borrowed $2,000 from me, claiming he needed it for an emergency car repair. I'd given it to him because he was my father and he said he'd pay me back within the month. That was 3 years ago. The money had never been repaid, and any time I'd gently reminded him about it, he'd acted offended that I was keeping track of something so petty between family members. When Wesley graduated from law school, Dad had asked me to split the cost of a Rolex watch as a graduation gift. I'd contributed $500. Dad had presented the watch to Wesley as if he'd paid for the entire thing himself, taking sole credit, and my contribution was never acknowledged. The car he'd given me at 18, the one he constantly referenced as proof of his generosity, came with strings so thick you could climb them. For 6 years, Every time I made a choice he disagreed with, he'd bring up that car. Every time I couldn't drop everything to do what he wanted, he'd remind me who'd given me transportation. The gift had become a cage, and I'd finally saved up and bought my own car just to break free of the constant manipulation. Every dollar he had ever spent on me came with invisible price tags that compounded interest over time. The waiter reappeared at exactly the wrong moment, his timing so unfortunate it would have been comedic under different circumstances. He approached hesitantly, the bill holder still sitting in front of me where Dad had slid it. "Excuse me, folks. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to process the check. Who'll be handling the payment tonight?" His eyes darted nervously between Dad and me, clearly sensing the tension but professionally obligated to get an answer. Dad pointed at me with a theatrical gesture worthy of a courtroom drama. She's treating the family tonight. My generous daughter." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to choke on. The waiter looked at me, expectant, his card reader already in hand. I met his eyes and said clearly, loudly enough that several nearby tables could hear, "No, I'm not. I didn't order this meal. I didn't invite these people. I'm not responsible for this bill. He is." I pointed at Dad. "He invited everyone. He chose this restaurant. He ordered the expensive wines. This is his bill." Dad's face transitioned through several colors, starting at red and progressing toward an alarming purple. "You're making a scene. In public. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" The irony of his statement was so rich I almost laughed. "I am making a scene? You just called me a family disgrace in front of 17 people, and demanded I pay $1,200 as punishment for not living my life the way you want me to. But sure, I'm the one making a scene." My voice rose despite my best efforts to control it, years of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. Several diners at nearby tables had turned to watch our drama unfold, their own conversations forgotten in favor of the real-life soap opera playing out in Morton's private dining section. The waiter backed away slowly, mumbling something about giving us a few more minutes to sort it out, clearly wanting to be anywhere but caught in the middle of this family meltdown. The financial reality of the situation hit the table like a bucket of cold water, and suddenly the carefully constructed facade began to crack. Dad sputtered, his face contorting with frustration and what looked like genuine panic. "I don't have that kind of cash on me. I wasn't planning to pay for everyone myself." The admission hung in the air, stunning in its implications. Wesley's eyes went wide. "Wait, Dad. You ordered all of this, invited all these people, without being able to pay for it." Dad waved his hand dismissively, trying to regain control of the narrative. "I expected your sister to contribute, to show some family responsibility for once. I thought she'd step up." But the logic didn't hold, and even his most loyal supporters looked confused. Uncle Marcus frowned. "Dale, you can't expect someone to pay for a meal they didn't know they were paying for. That's not how this works." Wesley finally showed a spark of the spine he'd been hoping for all night, though it was directed at protecting Dad rather than defending me. "I can split it with you, Dad. Well, put half on my card and half on yours." But Dad snapped at him, his pride apparently more important than practical solutions. "No. She needs to learn responsibility. She needs to contribute to this family instead of always taking." I reached into my purse with deliberate slowness, letting the moment stretch, feeling the weight of 17 sets of eyes on me. My fingers closed around my phone and I pulled it out, unlocking it with a swipe that felt loaded with significance. I opened my banking app, the one I checked obsessively every morning. The digital representation of 5 years of hard work and careful financial planning. I turned the screen toward Dad, holding it steady so he could read the numbers clearly in the dim restaurant lighting. "You want to talk about money, Dad? Let's talk about money." The balance displayed in clear, undeniable digits, $47,312.68. The number sat there on the screen like a challenge, like proof of everything he'd claimed I couldn't do. The truth bombs started falling like rain. each one dismantling the narrative Dad had built about my life. That unstable freelance career you love to mock? I made $120,000 last year. After taxes, after expenses, after everything, I cleared $90,000. From coloring pictures on a computer, as you so eloquently put it, I watched his face, saw the disbelief warring with confusion, saw him trying to find a way to dismiss what I was telling him. That $50,000 contract with the Seattle startup I mentioned? That's just one project. I have 3 other active clients right now with ongoing contracts. I'm booked solid through next year. I had to turn down 2 projects last month because I literally don't have the time to take on more work. The numbers kept coming, each one a nail in the coffin of his perception of me. I own my condo. Outright. No mortgage. I bought it 3 years ago with money I'd saved and I paid it off early because I hate debt. It's small, sure, just 800 square feet, but it's mine and nobody can take it away from me. Dad's disbelief manifested in denial, his voice rising in pitch and volume. That's not possible. You're lying. There's no way you have that kind of money. You're making this up to save face. But I had anticipated this, had known he wouldn't believe me without proof. I pulled up my email, found the contract with the Seattle startup, and handed him my phone. Read it yourself. The contract is right there, signed and dated. $50,000 for 6 months of work, with a potential extension if the project goes well. He snatched the phone from my hand, his eyes scanning the document with the intensity of a lawyer looking for loopholes. I watched his face as he read, saw the moment comprehension dawned, saw his jaw tighten as he realized I was telling the truth. Wesley leaned over to look at the screen, his eyes going wide. Holy shit, Harper. I had no idea. His voice carried genuine surprise mixed with something that might have been respect, or might have been envy, hard to tell which. The comparison came naturally, flowing from years of being measured against my brother, and found wanting. I turned to Wesley, keeping my voice conversational, curious rather than accusatory. How much student debt do you still have? Wesley's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Bethany put a warning hand on his arm, but it was too late. The question was already out there hanging in the air. It's not. I mean. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I pressed gently. 85,000? That's what you mentioned last Christmas when you were complaining about the monthly payments. Wesley nodded miserably. Give or take. I felt a twinge of guilt for putting him on the spot, but it needed to be said, needed to be out in the open. I paid off my $70,000 in student loans 2 years ago. I was 38 when I made the final payment. I threw a party for myself, just me and a bottle of champagne, celebrating being debt-free. The contrast between our situations, between the golden child and the disappointment, had never been starker. The real reason ID agreed to come to this dinner, the secret I'd been holding on to for weeks, finally emerged. I came tonight to tell you something important, Dad. My voice softened slightly, remembering the hope I'd carried into this restaurant before everything had gone sideways. I came to share some good news with you, to maybe, finally, get you to see me as successful in your eyes. Dad leaned forward, confused, his anger temporarily displaced by curiosity. I've been planning this for months. I wanted to wait until we were all together, until I could see your face when I told you. I paused, letting the moment build. I'm financially stable. I'm successful. I'm happy. I built a career and a life I love without your help, without your approval, without your money. I did it on my own terms, in my own way, and I succeeded. The words should have been triumphant, but they came out sad, tinged with regret for what could have been if Head just supported me instead of constantly tearing me down. The envelope came out of my purse next. A small cream-colored envelope that I'd been carrying around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to present it. I brought something for you and Mom. I held it up so everyone could see. Your 35th wedding anniversary is next month. You mentioned wanting to take a cruise. One of those luxury ones, through the Mediterranean that you've been talking about for years. I opened the envelope, pulled out the check ID written with such care, with such hope that this gesture might bridge the gap between us. $10,000. I was going to give this to you tonight, after dinner, as a gift. To send you on that cruise, to show you that I've made it, that I'm not the failure you think I am. The check was beautiful in its simplicity. My handwriting careful and neat. The amount spelled out in words and numbers. Dad's eyes locked onto it, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face that might have been regret. But then I did what I'd come here to do. What I realized I needed to do for my own sanity and self-respect. I tore the check in half. The sound of paper ripping cut through the silence like a gunshot. Then I tore it again. Into quarters. And again. Into tiny pieces that fluttered down onto the white tablecloth like confetti at a funeral. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad lunged forward, reaching for the pieces as if he could somehow tape them back together and make them valid again. What are you doing? You can't, that was $10,000. His voice cracked on the amount, the loss of money finally penetrating his anger. I let the last pieces fall from my fingers, watching them scatter across the expensive linens. I could pay for this dinner easily. The $1,200 wouldn't even make a dent in my savings. But I won't. Because this was never about money. This was about you needing to punish me, to control me, to make me feel small. I stood up, retrieving my coat from the back of my chair. It's about respect. And you've never respected me. Not once in my entire life. The boundary I'd been working toward in therapy, the line I'd been too scared to draw for 30 years, finally got articulated clearly. If you walk out, don't come back. Dad's voice thundered across the room, drawing stares from every table in the restaurant. The ultimatum was meant to scare me. To make me choose between my dignity and my family. To force me back into the submission he required. But instead of fear, I felt nothing but relief washing over me like a wave. Good, I said simply, meeting his eyes one last time. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. I'm done being your emotional punching bag. I'm done trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I'm done with all of this. I shouldered my purse, straightened my coat. You wanted me to contribute to this family? Here's my contribution. I'm removing the person you blame for everything from your life. You're welcome. The walk to the exit felt like moving through water, every step requiring conscious effort despite the fact that I'd never wanted to leave anywhere more badly in my life. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting like a dam breaking. Dad's voice rose above the din, yelling something about ungrateful children and disrespect. Mom was crying, her sobs audible even over the restaurant's background music. Wesley called my name. Harper. Harper, wait. But I didn't turn around, didn't slow down, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me hesitate. The waiter who'd been dealing with our table all night chased after me, his voice apologetic but insistent. Miss, excuse me, miss. The bill still needs to be settled. I kept walking, pushing through the heavy glass doors into the cold November night. Over my shoulder, without breaking stride, I called back. I didn't order anything. I didn't invite anyone. I'm not responsible for that bill. Talk to the man who orchestrated this whole disaster. The parking lot was nearly empty, the valet stand abandoned since it was past the dinner rush. My SUV sat in the third row, where I'd parked it myself after the valet's dismissive look had made me skip that particular service. I walked toward it on autopilot, my hands shaking so badly I had trouble getting my keys out of my purse. When I finally reached the driver's side door, I just stood there for a moment, leaning against the cold metal, letting the November air bite at my face and hands. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation started to crash, leaving me shaky and hollow. I managed to unlock the door and slide into the driver's seat, pulling the door closed behind me with a slam that felt final. Only then, in the privacy of my car with the windows fogged and the world shut out, did I let the tears come. But they weren't the tears I expected. They weren't sad or grief-stricken. They were relieved tears, Cathartic tears. The kind that come when you've been holding your breath for 30 years and finally remember how to exhale. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. The vibrations angry and insistent. Wesley's name flashed across the screen once, twice, 3 times. I hit ignore each time, watching his name disappear and reappear like a persistent mosquito. Then a text from Mom. Please come back and fix this. Your father is very upset. This is ruining everyone's evening. The words made me laugh. A sharp, bitter sound in the enclosed space. I texted back with steady fingers. I didn't break it. I'm not fixing it. I'm done being the family scapegoat. Take care of yourself, Mom. Another text came through immediately. How can you be so selfish? Think about the family. I didn't respond to that one. There was nothing left to say. The family she wanted me to think about had never thought about me, had never protected me, had never chosen me when it mattered. Wesley appeared at my car window before I could start the engine, his fist pounding on the glass hard enough to make me jump. I rolled down the window about 2 inches, just enough to hear him but not enough for him to reach through. What do you want, Wesley? My voice sounded tired even to my own ears. He was breathing hard, his face flushed from running across the parking lot. Harper, please. Just come back inside. I'll pay your share of the dinner if that's what it takes. I'll split it with Dad. Just don't leave like this. I stared at him. This brother Id looked up to my entire childhood, trying to find the person I remembered playing with in our backyard, building forts and sharing secrets. My share, Wesley. I didn't eat anything. I sat at that table for 2 hours and didn't consume a single bite of food. And this isn't about the money. When are you going to understand that? Wesley's confession tumbled out in a rush of words that seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised me. I know. His voice cracked. God, Harper, I know. I should have defended you. Not just tonight, but all the times before this. Every single time Dad tore you down and I just sat there like a coward. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. His hands gripped the edge of my car door, his knuckles white with pressure. He's our father. I don't know how to. He trailed off, unable to articulate the fear that had kept him silent for decades. I felt my anger soften slightly, replaced by a tired sort of pity. Yes, you can, Wesley. You can stand up to him. You choose not to. And that's worse because it means you know what he's doing is wrong but you let it happen anyway because it's easier for you when I'm the target. Wesley flinched like I'd slapped him. That's not. I don't. It's not that simple. But we both knew it was exactly that simple. The realization about Wesley's own struggles emerged slowly, his words halting and painful. He treats me like a show pony. Do you know that? Everything I do, every achievement, every case I win, it's all performance for him. I'm exhausted, Harper. I'm so tired of being perfect all the time. For a brief moment, I felt sympathy rising in my chest, a flicker of the sibling bond we'd once shared. But then I remembered the past 30 years. Remembered every time He'd watched Dad humiliate me and said nothing. Remembered him laughing at Dad's jokes at my expense. I understand that you're tired. I really do. But you still get the rewards, Wesley. You get the approval, the financial support, the public praise. You get to be exhausted in a beautiful house that Dad helped you buy. I just get the abuse with none of the benefits. So forgive me if I don't have much sympathy left for your struggle. Wesley had no response to that, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. I softened my voice slightly, not wanting to be needlessly cruel but needing him to understand. When you're ready to actually stand up to him, to risk losing his approval in order to do what's right, call me. Until then, lose my number. I pressed the button to roll my window back up, the barrier of glass rising between us feeling symbolic of something larger. Wesley stood there in the parking lot looking lost and defeated as I started the engine. I could see him in my rearview mirror as I backed out of the parking space, his figure growing smaller as I drove away. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved yet. I just felt tired. bone-deep tired. Like I'd been carrying a heavy weight for so long that even after setting it down my muscles couldn't remember how to relax. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and traffic signals, my mind replaying the dinner in fragments, analyzing every moment, second-guessing every word. My phone exploded with notifications during the drive home, the buzzing constant and maddening enough that I finally pulled over in a grocery store parking lot just to silence it. The family group chat, the one with 23 members including aunts, uncles, cousins, and some family friends, was blowing up with messages coming in faster than I could read them. I scrolled through quickly, watching the family divide in real time through text messages. Aunt Lorraine. That was extremely harsh, Harper. Your father is hurt and embarrassed. You could have handled this privately. Uncle Marcus. Dale had it coming. That was a setup and everyone knows it. Good for you, kid. My cousin Paige, Uncle Marcus' daughter from his first marriage. I can't believe you abandoned the family over a dinner bill. Shows your true colors. Another cousin. Vivian's daughter Felicity. I can't believe Grandpa Dale set her up like that. That was messed up. The messages kept coming. Accusatory and supportive in equal measure. Everyone rushing to plant their flag on one side or the other of the family divide. I typed out one final message to the group chat, my fingers moving quickly before I could second-guess myself. I didn't abandon anyone. I refused to be abused. There's a difference. I'm done being the family scapegoat, the person everyone can blame when they need someone to criticize. I'm blocking this chat now. If any of you want an actual relationship with me, one based on mutual respect rather than dysfunction, you have my personal number. Otherwise, this is goodbye. I wish you all well. I hit send and immediately muted the group chat, then blocked it entirely so the notifications would stop. The silence that followed felt profound. For the first time in my life, it had the final word in a family argument. Private texts started coming through from people who'd broken away from the group chat to message me individually. Uncle Marcus, I'm proud of you. That took real guts. Your dad needed to hear someone say no to him. Call me when you're ready to talk. His wife Brenda, Marcus is right. We've watched Dale treat you badly for years and we should have said something sooner. You're always welcome at our house. My younger cousin Felicity, who I'd always liked but hadn't been particularly close to. I always thought Grandpa was too hard on you. I'm sorry I never said anything. I was scared of him too. I'm here if you need to talk. The messages of support were few but they mattered, each one a small validation that I wasn't crazy, that what had happened tonight was as wrong as it had felt. I saved those messages, screenshotted them even, knowing I'd need to reference them later when the doubt crept in and I started questioning whether I'd overreacted. The next few days passed in a strange sort of suspended animation, the world continuing to turn while I existed in a bubble of processing and decompression. I blocked Dad's number first, watching his name disappear from my contacts with a finality that should have hurt but instead felt freeing. Then Mom's number, because her texts had devolved into guilt trips wrapped in concern. Your father hasn't eaten in 2 days. You've broken his heart. How can you be so cruel? Wesley's number got blocked on day 3. After 17 missed calls and a dozen texts that swung between apologetic and accusatory. I kept Uncle Marcus and his family unblocked, kept Felicity, and the handful of cousins who'd reached out with genuine support rather than judgment. Everyone else got cut off, the digital equivalent of closing a door and locking it behind me. Thanksgiving weekend I spent entirely alone, and it was the most peaceful Thanksgiving I'd had in memory. I ordered Chinese takeout on Thursday evening, spread the containers across my coffee table, and watched 3 movies back-to-back without anyone commenting on my choices or making passive-aggressive remarks about my life. I breathed deeply for what felt like the first time in months, letting silence fill my small condo like a balm. The guilt crept in around day 5, insidious and familiar, whispering that maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I should have just paid the bill and kept the peace. Maybe I destroyed my family over nothing important. I recognized the thought pattern immediately, the conditioning of 30 years trying to reassert itself, and I called my therapist Fiona for an emergency session. She fit me in on Monday morning, and I sat in her comfortable office with its soft gray walls, and told her everything that had happened. Fiona listened without interrupting, her face betraying nothing. Until I finished with, "Did I overreact? Should I have just paid and avoided all this drama?" She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Harper, let me ask you something. If a stranger on the street tried to force you to pay $1,200 for a meal they'd ordered, while calling you names and belittling your life choices, would you do it?" I shook my head. "Of course not. That would be insane." She nodded. "Then why is it okay when your father does it? You set a boundary. He violated it repeatedly and intentionally. You enforced consequences. That's not overreacting. That's self-preservation. That's growth." The aftermath at the restaurant became clear through Uncle Marcus, who texted me a detailed account a week after Thanksgiving with the kind of play-by-play normally reserved for sporting events. After I'd left, Dad had tried to force Wesley to pay the entire $1,200 bill, claiming it was his responsibility as the remaining child to fix the situation I'd created. Wesley, in what Uncle Marcus described as a shocking display of spine, had refused for the first time in his documented history. "I'm not paying for a dinner I didn't order for people I didn't invite as punishment for my sister's completely reasonable refusal to be manipulated." The words, according to Marcus, had stunned everyone into silence. Dad had turned purple and threatened to cut Wesley off from the family business, but Wesley had held firm. Eventually, Dad had been forced to put the entire bill on his own credit card, an outcome that sent him into a rage that lasted the entire drive home. Mom had cried the whole way, caught between her husband's fury and her daughter's absence, unable to comfort either because she'd chosen silence when it mattered. Dad had spent the rest of the weekend telling anyone who would listen that I'd ruined Thanksgiving, that I was selfish and ungrateful, that had washed his hands of me entirely. The smear campaign spread through the extended family like wildfire through dry grass, two competing narratives battling for dominance. Dad's version of events: ungrateful daughter refuses to help family with dinner bill, throws tantrum and abandons elderly parents in public restaurant, tears up anniversary gift out of spite, is selfish and disrespectful and clearly still bitter about her divorce. This version found purchase with his siblings and their families, with his old college friends, with anyone who'd always seen me as the problematic child. They posted vague Facebook statuses about the younger generation having no respect, about family loyalty meaning nothing anymore, about being disappointed in people they'd once been proud of. But Uncle Marcus' version, the truth, also made the rounds. Dad deliberately sets up daughter for public humiliation, demands she pay massive bill as punishment for not living life according to his specifications, has been financially and emotionally abusive for years, finally pushed too far and daughter stood up for herself. This version resonated with the younger cousins, with family members who'd witnessed Dad's behavior over the years, with people who were relieved someone had finally called him out. The family split down the middle, battle lines drawn in group texts and Facebook comments and awkward phone calls where people tried to feel out which side you were on before committing to an opinion. Wesley showed up at my condo 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, unannounced, ringing my doorbell insistently until I checked the peephole and saw him standing there looking haggard. I almost didn't let him in, my finger hovering over the intercom button while I debated whether I had the emotional energy for this conversation. Finally, curiosity won out, and I buzzed him up. He stood in my doorway looking like he hadn't slept properly in days, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usually perfect hair mussed. "Dad cut my year-end bonus from the family business," he said without preamble. "Said it was because I didn't control you at Thanksgiving, didn't make you pay the bill, didn't keep you in line." He laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. He docked my pay because I refused to be his enforcer against my own sister. I stepped aside to let him in, watching as he collapsed onto my couch like his strings had been cut. "Now you see," I said quietly, "his love is conditional. His approval is performance-based. The minute you stop playing your role perfectly, you become expendable too." Wesley's apology was more genuine than I'd expected, lacking the defensive qualifications that usually accompanied family apologies. "I was a coward, Harper. For years, decades even. I let him treat you terribly, because as long as he was focused on you, he wasn't focused on me. I sacrificed you for my own comfort and safety. That's unforgivable." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I've been in therapy since last week. Started going because Bethany threatened to take the kids and leave if I didn't deal with my family dysfunction. The therapist asked me to list all the times I stood up for you against Dad, and I couldn't think of a single instance. Not one. 35 years of being your brother and I never defended you once." The admission hung between us like smoke. I appreciated his honesty, valued that he was finally seeing the truth, but years of pain couldn't be undone with one conversation. "I need time, Wesley. You can't undo decades of silence and complicity with one apology, no matter how sincere. Maybe eventually we can rebuild something, but it has to be different. It has to be real." He nodded, pulling out a business card for his therapist and writing his new cell number on the back. "I got a new phone number. Dad doesn't have it. I'm creating some distance, setting some boundaries of my own. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. Take all the time you need." Mom's guilt arrived via handwritten letter 2 weeks later, the envelope addressed in her careful cursive and marked with enough stamps to send a much heavier package. I recognized her handwriting immediately and almost threw it away unopened. But something made me slice through the seal and unfold the pages inside. The letter was 6 pages long, front and back. Mom's handwriting getting shakier as it progressed like she was crying while she wrote. She apologized for everything, starting from my childhood and moving chronologically through my life, acknowledging specific incidents where Shed failed to protect me, times Shed chosen Dad's comfort over my safety, moments where her silence had enabled his abuse. "I was scared of him too," she wrote. "I know that's not an excuse. I should have protected you. You were my daughter, and I let him hurt you, because it was easier than standing up to him. I'm staying with your Aunt Lorraine right now. Your father's behavior has gotten worse since Thanksgiving. He's angry all the time, taking it out on everyone. I can't live like that anymore." She ended with, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm sorry, Harper. You deserved a mother who fought for you. And I failed. I'm sorry." The no-contact decision solidified over the following months as I worked through the trauma with Fiona and started to build a life untethered from my family's dysfunction. Permanent, absolute no contact with Dad became non-negotiable. There was no relationship worth salvaging there. No version of him that would suddenly become the father I'd always needed. He was who he was, and I was done hoping he'd change. With Mom, I decided on extremely low contact with rigid boundaries, willing to occasionally respond to her letters, but not ready for phone calls or visits. If she left Dad, if she did the work to understand how Shed enabled him, maybe something could be rebuilt eventually. But that was years away, if it ever happened at all. Wesley existed in a cautious middle space, his texts coming once every few weeks with updates on his therapy progress, and small attempts at connection that I sometimes responded to and sometimes didn't, depending on my capacity. I kept Uncle Marcus and Brenda in my life fully, grateful for their unwavering support. The cousins who'd reached out with genuine care earned their place in my phone contacts. Everyone else got relegated to the distant past where they belonged. The following Thanksgiving arrived with a freedom I hadn't anticipated. The absence of obligatory family dinner opening up possibilities I'd never considered. I hosted what my friends called Friendsgiving in my small condo, inviting 6 people who'd become my chosen family over the past year. Uncle Marcus and Brenda came, bearing a homemade pumpkin pie and stories that made everyone laugh. My best friend Adelaide, who I'd known since college, brought her new boyfriend and enough wine for an army. Two work friends, Thea and Silas, showed up with appetizers and good music. We cooked together in my tiny kitchen, elbowing each other for space at the stove, laughing when the rolls burned and improvising solutions when we realized we'd forgotten cranberry sauce. The apartment filled with the smells of roasting turkey and garlic mashed potatoes, with conversation and laughter that had no undercurrent of tension or judgment. Adelaide raised her glass mid-dinner and declared, "To found family, to the people we choose, who choose us back, who love us for who we are instead of who they want us to be." We all clinked glasses, and I felt something in my chest expand and soften, like a fist that had been clenched for 30 years finally opening. The final reflection came to me late that night after everyone had gone home and I sat among the dirty dishes and leftover food containers, too content and tired to clean up just yet. My father had called me a family disgrace, had weaponized those words to break me down and force my submission, but had been wrong about which one of us bore that title. The disgrace wasn't my divorce or my career or my choices. The disgrace was how Head treated me, how Head used love as a weapon and approval as a carrot always just out of reach, how Head built his ego on the foundation of my diminishment. The triumph wasn't in proving him wrong about my success, though there was satisfaction in that. The real triumph was in walking away, in choosing my own peace over his approval, in finally understanding that his opinion of me had nothing to do with my actual worth. I'd spent 30 years seeking his validation, contorting myself into increasingly smaller boxes trying to win a prize that was never really available. I'd spend the rest of my life approving of myself, and that would be worth more than any Thanksgiving dinner at Morton's Steakhouse, more than any check I could have written, more than any relationship built on submission and fear. The peace I found wasn't immediate or absolute, but it grew steadily like a plant I watered daily with therapy and self-compassion and boundaries. I wasn't bitter anymore. That was the surprising part. I'd expected to carry anger like a stone in my pocket, to feel the weight of it constantly, but instead, I felt freed, lightened, like I'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks for 3 decades, and someone had finally told me I could set it down. My business continued to thrive without the constant drag of Dad's negativity pulling at my confidence. I started dating again, cautiously at first, but without the desperate need for external validation that had colored my marriage to Julian. Most importantly, I was happy in a way I hadn't known was possible, the kind of contentment that comes from living authentically instead of performing for an audience that would never be satisfied. The weight of Dad's judgment was gone, evaporated like morning fog under sunlight, and in its absence, I could finally breathe deeply and freely. Some people will call you a disgrace for setting boundaries, for choosing yourself, for refusing to be diminished. Let them. The people who matter, the ones who truly love you and see your worth, will call you brave instead. They'll celebrate your strength rather than mourning your submission. They'll choose you back when you choose yourself. And in the end, that's the only family worth having anyway. The one built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and control. I learned that lesson at 30 years old in the parking lot of an expensive steakhouse, surrounded by the ruins of a family that had never really been a safe place to land. And I learned it again 1 year later in my small condo filled with people who loved me for exactly who I was. No performance required, no conditions attached. That's the real story, the one worth telling, not about the dinner that cost $1,200, but about the freedom that turned out to be priceless. So tell me, have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family dynamic to save yourself? Have you ever been forced to choose between your peace and someone else's comfort? Drop your experiences in the comments below because I know I'm not alone in this. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries even when it's hard. Subscribe for more real talk about family, healing, and finding your people. And remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Thank you so much for listening to my story, for witnessing this chapter of my life, for being part of the community that reminds me, I'm not alone. I wish you all the courage to set the boundaries you need and the peace that comes from living authentically. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You're worth it.